Welcome, friends. Welcome on the Barricades. This is a podcast where Eastern European journalists discuss about events taking place in this part of the world from a critical perspective. And today we are going to discuss and analyze academia with a very interesting and important researcher, Arto Artinian, who teaches for a number of years in the United States, but is a Bulgarian-born academic. Thank you for being here with us, Arto.
Thank you, Maria, for inviting me on the barricade.
He is again on the barricades because last time we wanted to discuss also academia, but unfortunately politics took much of the debate, and now the politics of the academia was a theme that we promised that we were going to discuss in detail. Now, of course, people think that this might be an elitist debate. But I think it's a rather realistic one because the next and the future leader and the next elites and the next workforce is prepared and is trained in academia. So it is very important to see how is the academia structured, because academia is the society in a nutshell, and it is very important to see the trends, because once you see the trends in the academia, you see the trends in the whole of society. And the first question that I want to ask before allowing you to answer and then ask a question back, because I have a lot of things to say about academia in Romania since I've been teaching here since 2001, I think almost 20 years. So I have a lot of experience. So the first question that I want to ask was, why did you go to the United States? Because it was glamorous, because you thought it was going to be an important step forward. Why did you choose to teach there? And where exactly do you do that? And yeah, why, basically?
Yeah. Well, I've actually spent a long time in the United States, and I came first with my parents when the borders were opened after the Cold War ended in the early 1990s, and because I had an aunt here and an uncle family on my father's side who moved to the United States in the late 1960s from Bulgaria, and so the borders opened, and my family got an invitation to visit. And this was like 93, this was sort of the beginning of the transition. And I didn't want to go because I was, in the music school, high school, and I was doing great, and my friends and everything. And all of a sudden, my parents were like, let's go to visit your aunt and uncle because now we can
But
travel.
what were you studying in the music school?
Well,
What is?
I was playing an instrument. I was playing the flute, and I played accordion. And at that time, I was getting interested in also writing music. So I was having fun. I mean, the music school in Plovdiv in Bulgaria was a great place, and I'm still very close friends with my friends from there. And there was no reason for me to leave, But um, we visited my aunt and uncle, and of course, this was the early '93, and it was going to be like a 3 month to 6 month visit. And then my father and my grandfather went back to Bulgaria. And then, of course, the transition had already started, and they didn't have jobs anymore because in the time that we were visiting my aunt and uncle in New York, my father and my mother lost their jobs because their workplaces were closed. This was the beginning of this kind of violent theft of public property and the means of the desocialization of the production, the privatization of the means of production. So and they said, you should just stay here and then go to college. And my father, he went back and forth and back and forth. Really adapted to life in the United States. My mom stayed here, so we were one of those generations that were caught. I was one of those generations that was caught in the generation that was caught in the middle while being a teenager. Between the two worlds. So I started college. Here. This was in '93. I started
But
college
was
because
it
I was here.
possible for you to go also to a music school, or were you somehow geared towards other field of study? What happened?
Well, it's interesting. Big fact, I went to study music here because I was studying music in Bulgaria. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to college. I started my college studies as a music composition major. So I went to a conservatory, essentially, Eastman School of Music in Rochester, because I wanted to study music. So I started my college education by studying music, but I also had this interest uh, in history and politics and philosophy, but I never really studied it in high school, except what we studied in high school, right? And so I also became a double major in political science, as they say, or with a gear towards political philosophy. So that's how I got into academia as a music student, essentially, who also studied political philosophy as a second degree. So that was
But
the beginning.
you are not, you weren't probably able to find a job as a musician, so good thing you also majored in political science, because that granted you the possibility to stay in academia, isn't it?
You're absolutely correct, because I ended up playing kind of avant-garde music. Like I geared towards essentially free jazz and experimental kind of experimental rock music, and we played for me and my friends played for 2 to 2.5 years. We tried to make a living by playing in the East Coast of the United States, and then we were going to try in European festivals in the summer. Had friends in Sweden and Germany, and but it's just we just couldn't do it. I mean, the audience for this kind of music in the United States is essentially zero. It's not enough to sustain uh, kind of young musicians with no established names. In Europe, it's easier. Still, you can find these avant-garde festivals, but it's just not. It was not possible to make a living just playing music. So um, I became a high school teacher. I had to become a high school teacher because I needed a job, and there's a job that I thought I would enjoy because I taught as an assistant in college for a year. And in America, it's very easy to become a high school teacher because the standards are very low to become a high school teacher, at
Really?
least in New York. Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
let me explain that essentially in Romania, what the system is that you have to pass a national exam. And since every school has the same curricula, I think this is a great idea. A lot of the people that I'm surrounded by think that this is a totalitarian idea, that basically you measure everybody with the same tools and you don't have space for autonomy and so on and so forth. I think this is plain stupid, because you cannot build a society without shared knowledge, and you cannot build a society based on the principle of equality of chances if you don't teach everybody the same thing, and you allow those who have money to be taught, I don't know, computer science since fifth grade, and those who don't have money to be dropouts at 11 years old. So basically, we have this system which is very good and allows for the competition to take place outside the school. Another important thing that I am very proud of in the Romanian educational system is the fact that you don't hire yourself in the high school. You have to pass this national exam. That is kind of hard. A lot of people criticize this exam. There is a lot of bad blood against it, but I'm all for it, because I also started teaching 20 years ago, 20 and something. I started teaching as a high school teacher here in Bucharest, and I had to pass this exam, and it was my chance. I think it was one of the few very fair and honest exams that I passed. There were 50 candidates on two places, and basically you would get, if you would get this, I think I am forgetting the term right now, where you have a stable contract
Tenure.
for your life. Tenure, this is the word, and you get tenure. So basically I got tenured. I had a 4-hour exam. It was kind of brutal, of course, this 4-hour exam, but at the end, I was able to take one of the two places that were available. And this is it. And the thing is that here in Romania, you have to get at least 7 out of 10. points available in order to pass and to get this tenured in the educational system. And I think it's a very good thing because there is no corruption. I think this is one of the very few places where you cannot arrange anything, and it's open, it's for everybody. You just go, you pass the exam. If you get a good grade, you can choose the school you're going to. And of course, the school managers are very frustrated because they want to employ the people that they know and they want to control things, and they can't. Luckily for the teachers,
Yeah.
And it also gives you, some sort of moral ground because you passed an exam, you won your tenured through quite a battle, because you can imagine that at 50 people, competing for two places is kind of difficult to get the first place or the second one. And this is it. For me, I think it's a very good system. What's the system in New York? How do you become college, a high school teacher?
Well, in my now this was in 2001, so I don't know how it is now. I had a master's degree in music composition. Actually, it's called experimental music composition, and I had an undergraduate degree in philosophy. So I sent my application just blindly. I just wrote an email to this high school that needed a history teacher, and I received an email back from the principal, and she said, "Come for an interview." And I went for the interview, and it was a half an hour. General questions. You taught before? How much have you taught? And I said, is it a problem that I didn't study education? I didn't prepare to be a teacher. She said, no, it's fine. You have a political science degree, so you can teach history, but you had your master's within 2 years in order to keep your job if you got it. But I said, I already have a master's, but it's in experimental music composition. She said, that's fine, as long as you have a master's. Okay, so I had to take an exam, but it's not a national exam, of course, because in America there's nothing national. There's a New York State teacher's exam, but exam is a joke. I took it with no preparation. It's multiple choice. I think
Oh,
I think everybody passes. It's general questions like they give you a painting of the Mona Lisa and they say this is an example kind of painting. Renaissance painting, avant-garde.
oh,
So the teacher the initial licensing exam is extremely trivial. Then I had to pass an exam in childhood psychology, educational psychology, as they say. Do I know the basics? Childhood developmental psychology. Again, it's a multiple choice exam. That you can take. I took it in the basement of a private testing center.
oh
So
man, this is
it's tragic, and
unbelievable.
yeah,
This is really tragic
it's
because in
unbelievable. And
Romania,
the worst,
school, besides the school, I mean,
yeah,
you have
and
to
the
take
real,
some courses. Yes, please go ahead.
yeah, and then I had to go to the police. Took my fingerprints to make sure I don't have a record, uh, you know, like a felony or whatnot. And then I started working. And in order to get tenure, you have to go through 3 years of I had an experienced teacher who would watch me teach once a week and he would give me feedback. And he was great. He was a great teacher. But I thought it was very easy to become a teacher in terms of the exam and the licensing. But I think the real problem of American secondary education is that the job doesn't have a very high social status. So it attracts in general, not the best students, kind of mediocre students. So I have a lot of students in my classes who want to become teachers, and most of the time they're not best students in the class, and they must be if they're going to become teachers. They're sort of like average students or worse, because people don't want to become teachers. There's a massive shortage of teachers in the United States. It's not a job that has high social profile because according to American ideology, it's not a job that makes money. It's America's fundamentally anti-intellectual in its orientation. Its elites are anti-intellectual. So teachers are not really considered on the same level of importance as lawyers or doctors or computer programmers or accountants. They're basically on the bottom. And I've even had students who tell me in college, if I give them a hard time, if they're not doing their work and their exams, and they're like, come on, you're just a teacher. If you that smart, you wouldn't be doing this job. I've actually heard this many times as a teacher. So uh,
Yes, I know. Well, this is not the case for, especially in academia, this is not the case. Even though at the private university where I'm teaching, they say, well, but this is private. You should just give us, higher grades because we pay, So there is this mentality that you actually buy your
yeah,
diploma. And unfortunately, in Romania, of course, teachers had high social status, but now things are in the past 3 decades since I say this often, they threw mud in the school and now they are complaining it is dirty. I mean, they took every possible measure, to not to raise the wages, not to invest in infrastructure. We had cases where students died because they fell in the toilet that was improvised, in the schoolyard. Can you imagine that? This is the level of poverty. This is unbelievable. Can you imagine a child dying at school because he or she wants to go to the bathroom and they fell in the toilet that is organized? It is unbelievable. We also had problems because the ceiling fell on the students in one school. And this is the level, of this is how politicians treated the school. And of course, a lot of the teachers didn't want to go there, but they go there because they have tenure, because they have stability, because they have vacations, and because they like working with students. This is basically
yeah.
it. And another thing is that we are building the anti-intellectual culture. I mean, we are at the point where we tried, and the media tried long and hard to focus on how bad public education is and how bad and Stalinist and authoritarian teachers are, and how they should be fired because they have a backwards mentality, then they are all fascists, and so on and so forth. This is the idea, and they are not prone, to very progressive ideas in teaching. I mean, what can you do when you have like 33 people in a classroom, You should have like 10 or 15, and then you have quality. But when you have, I don't know, here in Bucharest, there are, and most of the schools have like 33 students. I don't know how many students did you have to teach? What sizes were the classes?
In high school, yeah, in the college, it depends on the class. It depends on the college. In my case, I have about anywhere from 15 to 30 students in the university classes as well. Um, but here there's another big question, which is what is the purpose of the education system? And we know the answer. The answer. I mean, there are many people who've written about this. For example, Althusser's answer, the French thinker Louis Althusser, who was very influential in Western Europe and kind of Marxism in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. State is the primary ideological state apparatus of society, right? So the purpose of the public school is to indoctrinate, and the public university is to indoctrinate the appropriate types of citizens based on their social class. So in the United States, for example, the students who go to the public schools in New York City, in the working class neighborhoods, obviously those schools are optimized and they're organized not to create public intellectuals and people who know how to think to the best of their ability. It's designed to create low wage to middle wage labor workers. So when my progressive liberal friends are shocked that they're cutting music and there's no art and there's no philosophy in your most American public schools do not teach philosophy as a mandatory subject.
Wow.
So you produce students who are semi-literate on their age and their cognitive capabilities. They're underdeveloped intellectually. They can do much more than what they leave high school with, right? If they come from certain schools, which are the majority of the schools that serve a middle class, non-wealth owning uh, members of American society. And of course, if you go to the elite private schools or the elite public schools, there is more to train the mind to read, write, to think, to study the basics of logic. It's not great either because it's a generally anti-intellectual culture that prioritizes, the investment of capital in the most efficient and successful ways. But in Bulgaria, for example, yes, from in the socialist period, uh, absolutely, there were still ideological state apparatuses, the school, but the emphasis was different. The ideological emphasis, with differences according to different periods in Bulgaria, uh, the emphasis was to create a well-rounded individual as best as possible. I mean, this is in Bulgaria especially true in the 70s and the early parts of 80s when the Minister of Culture essentially was Lyudmila Zhivkova. She was the daughter of the general secretary, but she was kind of this very strange but very brilliant and interesting woman who is single-handedly almost responsible for the massive expansions of Bulgarian education, arts. Bulgarian film industry was making 85 um, films, not TV series, but films a year in the late 70s. For a country of 8 million people, that's unheard of.
That's huge.
Yeah, that's huge. And so yes, schools are ideological training grounds to make the correct desired type of citizens uh, based on based on the political visions of those in power. But in the Bulgarian socialist system, it's a totally different ideological orientation than in the American public education system, which basically aims to train the proletariat, give them the minimum amount of intellectual skills, and of course, without the intellectual apparatus being developed, you can't really do anything. Uh, and thus they graduate students who are completely undereducated constantly. But I think by 1% sure, because they don't. The United States does not need millions of students every year who are 18 years old and they're going to go to college and become engineers and doctors and scientists and philosophers and poets, who then are going to look at the political system and start asking uh,
Interesting
really
questions.
important questions and critiques.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a French thinker who
Oh,
unfortunately committed suicide last by the name of Baron Stiegler. He's widely translated in English. He's totally not translated in Bulgarian. I don't know about Romanian, but should be read. But he's written a lot of books, and his central time is a time of generalized stupidity, or what he called generalized proletarianization. Capitalism today continuously dumbs down life through its optimizations and so on. That most contemporary people said, including the wealthy, including the capitalists themselves, are functioning in an underdeveloped human cognitive way. So it's a general crisis of contemporary capitalism, which is most deeply felt in the United States. Capitalists, in a sense, much more developed Bulgaria or Romania. So we see the general stupidity in Slair's words much more clearly, I think, in the American education system than, for example, probably as of yet.
yes, the problem is that inequality, I would say, yes, there is a general stupidity, but I would be glad if we were equal in that stupidity, but we're not. The thing I would emphasize here
Yeah.
is unequal cognitive development, because I think it is worse even than the economic one. And you saw that during the pandemic, when you had people believing that Bill Gates is going to insert a chip in their heads
Yeah.
to know what they're thinking. And probably Bill Gates would have gotten, very bored, because I don't think their thoughts were very elaborate if they were prepared to believe a nonsense like that. So basically, I think there is this. I mean, they live on different worlds. the problem is, and I discussed this when trying to tackle the problem of fake news. If you want to tackle the problem of fake news, you have to tackle this cognitive inequality and cognitive unequal development at the cognitive level. I mean, you have people that are highly trained and educated, and at the same time, you have people in Romania and the rural areas, for instance, they drop out of school in large numbers, and by large numbers, I mean 20%. That's huge. And unfortunately, out of the 2000 200,000 students that enrolled 12 years ago in the educational system in Romania, only 38% of them managed to graduate and to pass their final exam. We don't have like the equivalent of the SAT, we have the equivalent of the French baccalaureate. You have to pass this final exam in order to be a fully graduate student in, and only 38% of the students manage to do that. Can you imagine? So it is indeed a problem, because you have huge disparities between those who are born in the wealthy parts of Romania and basically in towns and urban centers, and those who live in villages. And how can you build a society when you have such cognitive disparities and people living in completely separate worlds, basically? And I think it is the same
Yeah,
situation in the United States from what I've read. I mean, if you're rich and if you're born in a rich family, then you have access to education. If not, well, this is it.
yeah. I mean, in the New York City public school system, which is the biggest in the United States, um, New York City public school 4 year, because the high school here is 4 years, and there is no state required. There is a state exam that you have to take in different subjects, but technically you don't necessarily need to pass all of them in order to graduate. You'll just get a lower level diploma. It's not like the baccalaureate, or in Bulgaria, the maturation exam, the state exam at the end of high school that you have to pass in order to graduate. Each thing. But I remember when I was teaching in the high school, the graduation rates in city public schools were anywhere from 9% of the students graduate on time in a particular 9%, not nine. So in one high school there was a 92% dropout rate in high school, all the way up. Uh, but I think you can very easily see in the system by looking at the curriculum what social class is targeted at school. So, for example, if you look at a public university that caters to working class students, the curriculum is supposedly humanitarian education, right? In the best traditions of the European Enlightenment, cultivating the curriculum of Aristotle's, academy, and a mixture of all the different types of philosophy, natural philosophy. But if you look at the actual curriculum, like in the City University of New York, where I teach, big kind of work class university, 250,000 students or something like that, 18 different campuses. The curriculum is, yes, the student must take the first 2 years of required classes and required areas that are going to give them a grounding in the humanitarian education, like what they call in America the liberal arts, right? So mathematics, science, logic, and so on and so forth. And it's up to the student to choose from a menu of courses, right? If you look at an elite university like an
It's
Ivy
like a
League university,
restaurant.
yeah, exactly. Like if you look at the Columbia University, also in New York, first year students read the same books because they take a sequence that's 1 year long. It could be called great literature or great books, or it could have some politically correct name today, but they all read a certain sequence of incredibly important texts in history. The emphasis is different. The emphasis is you're going to read Aristotle for 3 months. You're going to read, Shakespeare's 2 months. You're going to read the foundational texts of Buddhism, for 1 month. You're going to read, St. Augustine's meditations on the sacred and the secular. You're going to listen to jazz. You're going to read about art in the 16th century or the 19th century. You're going to read about archaeology, and you don't really have that in the public universities that cater towards the working class. It's a much more quote unquote practical education. It's a dumbed down education, right? I mean, they would never admit it, but that's essentially the effect, and that continues the unequal, as you said, unequal, not just unequal class position, but the unequal intellectual development, which reinforces the class division. You know, um,
Exactly. But you started to teach
Victor,
in this university when? How much did you teach in high school? Because I taught in high school for two
so I
years,
taught
only
it.
for 2 years. Then I switched to the university, and I don't think my experience, but it was very interesting and enlightening. I think that even though it was, for 2 years, how many years did you teach in the public educational system
I
in high
taught,
school, and when did you, please?
yeah, I taught for 5 years in the high school, 5 years, and then I started my graduate studies because in order to keep your job, and of course you get uh, promoted, you get more pay uh, if you have an additional graduate degree. So I said, okay, maybe I will start a PhD in political philosophy. So let me try it while I'm teaching. So I started attending courses in the evening after work, but I couldn't do it because the teaching job, the high school teaching job was too intense. So I had to choose. So I chose to leave, to resign from the high school and focus on the PhD program uh, in the university. And then I started teaching at the university as they call in America adjunct labor. I don't know how it would be in English. In Bulgarian, there's a different term. They get paid hour of teaching,
Ah,
kind of like
yeah.
Hegel did in his time, um, where you make minimum wage essentially. You make minimum wage, and that's how most American universities arrange their faculty structure. So in every university in America, a majority of the professors and the college teachers don't have tenure. They don't have a real salary, and they don't have a contract. They work on short-term semester or year-by-year basis, and they get paid by the hour, and they make minimum wage, $26,000 a year. Which in the United States is uh, essentially minimum wage if you average it out to 12 months of pay. So I did that, and I started teaching full time as tenure, uh, professor in 2013.
Wow, such a long time, such a long
Huge.
time it took you.
Yeah.
Well, luckily for me, in Romania, of course, we had this system. It's called paid by the hour. This is upfront. They don't call you an adjunct. They are calling this job paid by the hour. And the sad thing is that you don't get money on vacations. You don't get money. You get only money
Same
for
thing.
what you.
The same thing.
And another sad thing is that basically you have no stability. You don't know what we are going to do from what year to another. You are very precarious. And of course, the dean, if he or she doesn't like you, they don't, open up a position for you to apply to get a permanent contract. At the same time, they keep you there to write their articles and to exploit you in many ways, because we have this very feudal way, oh, you like this course, Arto, I know you like music, why don't you write this interesting article, but I would also like to have my name on it so that I can,
Yeah.
this is very, we have this very, because in Romania I think we are champions to this style of solving things through informal ways. I don't know what's the situation in the United States or Bulgaria, but here we have these very popular feudal relations, because what happened was that basically in Romania we had this thing that was called the servitude. I don't know how to call it, but basically the peasants were almost slaves, and we abolished that among the I mean, here in Romania lasted the longest in the European Union. And this is why we have this type of solving things, also being kind of obedient but shrewd at the same time, and solving things in very informal ways, you know. So the power structure is very interesting in Romania and also in academia, because you have this very strict, you know, hierarchy, with usually one man in the center of things, you know, the dean or the rector or something, who has all the power. And now he has all these acolytes that basically write his or her articles, basically write, you know, the papers and the research grants, and he is there, the manager, but he doesn't do the work and things like that. So I don't know what's the situation
Yeah.
in the a comparison. This is the situation in Romania, and I explain it because there is also this cultural touch to it. We also have this style when they give us a rule, no matter how absurd, we instantly, and even I'm doing this, I'm not taking myself out of the equation. We're thinking of ways of circumventing, you know, of bending the rules or finding our way out. I mean, we are not this militant, you know, the people and citizens that go against intent protest. No, we always find ways to move around an absurd system. So I don't know
It
what's the
sounds
situation there.
it's Bulgaria. In the U.S., I would say it's completely bureaucratized because remember, these are Protestant. This is a Protestant country in terms of ideology. So the Protestant work ethic, you know, literally by Weber, this is a Puritan society in its fundamental ideology still. So it's very rule based. It doesn't mean that there's no circumvention of rules, but uh, American society is overdetermined by lawyers, complex legal system, highly complex taxation system, legal system. It's very, very bureaucratized and committed by kind of legal logic, right? I mean, Foucault writes about this in some of his lectures in the 70s when he talks about kind of German-style liberalism, you know, ordo liberalism, you know, German neoliberalism. It's very well ordered because the law themselves replaces the politics, right? Because that's basically the foundational arguments of all these right-wing reactionary thinkers like Hayek and von Mises. They said the law is objective and it must replace the messy, you know, the messy world of politics, you know, of ideas and, you know, no, rule-based societies. I think that's the worst form of totalitarianism because it's on the surface, it's fair because everybody sees the rules, but the rules are designed in such a way that they automatically and always prioritize the ruling class. There's no doubt about it. You know, the wealthy Americans routinely cheat on their taxes, even though they're supposed to pay a lot in taxes because they make a lot of income, for example. They pay far less than the non-wealthy Americans, than the working class and the petty bourgeoisie, right? Because the rules make it possible for them to do that. Even though the rules are, you know, supposedly enforced and they're public and corrupt, there's low corruption in America compared to Mexico and, you know, compared to Bulgaria. There's no need to have informal corruption in New York. The corruption is already built into the legal system. Yeah, it's much more violent. It's a much more violent type of exploitation, I think, if you have a rule-based exploitation, because it's more difficult to fight in a way against it. You know, it makes the repression more easy, automatic. You know, so but I had this other idea about. Oh well, before I go to the other idea, uh, I must say, in my experience teaching the university in New York, I have had until about 2013, until about 2000, I had very militant, politically militant students. Uh, I had who were primarily Black and Latino. It was an interesting mixture who were politically very sophisticated, young activists who were very serious, hardcore. And this was, of course, Occupy Wall Street. Not only they were always organizing campus on important issues, they had a radio station, you know, and they were publishing weekly and monthly papers on campus. There was real organizing, and all of that stuff disappeared, at least in my university, 7 or 8 years. So there's been a shift, I think, in the energy. But I think this connects to this other important point you started our conversation with about academia and intellectualism. And I think it's a big mistake to think in the 20 of academic labor uh, the way academic labor was thought about in the beginning of the 20th century, right? So, for example, when Lenin was a law student, petty bourgeois aristocrats, those are social class bases. But I think after the mass democratization of the university in Europe and the United States, for example, and other parts of the world, socialist and left-wing let's just say broadly anti-capitalist politics, because the college campuses were opened up, and of course, a lot of smarter members of the capitalist class understood that they had to allow more working class students in the university, because they needed that kind of more educated labor force to work in factories and in offices. But I think in the 21st century, the typical college is not petty bourgeois necessarily at all. In fact, it's better to call
Well,
college professors college education or college workers or intellectual workers, however you want to frame it. So I think there's a big mistake. I have friends who do it, to perceive college professors or academics automatically as people who are tuned with or who do not plug in to the real class struggle. But so are a lot of plumbers, drivers, and a lot of manual labor working class people. They're also just as alienated and or co-opted in the political process, right? So I think, as you said, what happens at the university today, because so many people go to the university, is much more important than what happened in the university 100 years ago. So I think the university
yes,
is very much should be perceived as a battleground of politics.
well, on that thought, we are going to end the first segment of our discussion. Then we are going to go on the second segment where we come back to this, analyzing also the research and how the research is balanced with the teaching activities and what are the main teaching areas and research areas in different universities. And a lot of the things that I think you're enjoying seeing, because as Arto said, studying university now is studying the future of the society, I would say. So we are going to end here the first segment of our show, and we are going to come back with the next segment of our discussion. Stay tuned.